Let me start with something that everybody's heard their whole life. Is breakfast actually the most important meal of the day?
No, and that phrase has a birthday. It first appears in 1917 in a magazine called Good Health, published by Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, the man who invented cornflakes, and his original cornflakes had no sugar in them because he invented them specifically to suppress sexual appetite. So, the most important meal of the day was born in a health magazine run by a man whose primary motivation was getting Americans to stop thinking about sex. That's where we're starting.
All right, so if that idea is only about 100 years old, what were humans actually doing before that?
For most of human history, breakfast didn't exist as a concept. Hunter-gatherers ate when food was available. No schedule, no meal structure, no morning ritual. The body operated in a fasted state by default, not as a health intervention, just as the natural condition of being human. When you get to early civilizations, the pattern holds. Ancient Rome, one of the most sophisticated cultures in history, ate one primary meal a day. Midday, morning eating was minimal or skipped entirely. They weren't doing this because they had no food, they had a philosophy about it. Here's where it gets interesting for anyone practicing OMAD today. The word cereal comes from Ceres, the Roman goddess of grain and agriculture, the Romans who philosophized about one meal a day, who considered multiple meals a form of weakness. They also unknowingly named the product that would eventually be used to dismantle their entire eating philosophy, and they weren't alone in this thinking. Around 400 BCE, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, prescribed one meal a day for weight loss, exercise on an empty stomach before eating, and high-fat foods for satiety. That's OMAD, plus fasted cardio, plus a ketogenic satiety principle, written 2,400 years ago. There's an ancient Indian saying that frames it this way: one meal a day equals a yogi, a saint, 2 meals a day equals an enjoyer, 3 meals a day equals a sick person. Not excessive, not less than ideal, a sick person. Then the medieval church made it theological. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century formally classified eating too early as prepare, the sin of eating too soon, a form of gluttony. Breakfast wasn't just uncommon, it was morally condemned, and there was a class dimension to it. Skipping breakfast was a status signal. Nobles didn't eat in the morning. They didn't need to. Laborers who ate at daybreak were fueling physical work and were slightly ashamed of it. The upper class fasted through the morning as a display of self-control and social standing. Zoom out globally, and the pattern repeats everywhere: Jewish twice-weekly fasting, early Christian Wednesday and Friday fasts, Benedictine monks eating one meal a day for over 200 days a year, Ramadan, Hindu fasting traditions. This isn't one culture's quirk. It's a near-universal human relationship with food that held for millennia.
So if that was the global default for most of history, where does the mandatory breakfast idea actually come from?
It comes from a sickly child raised inside the founding household of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. John Harvey Kellogg grew up with health and faith as the same thing. That's not background detail, it's the entire explanation for everything he built. The Battle Creek Sanitarium wasn't a fringe operation, it was serious. Part European spa, part research hospital, part wellness resort. His guest list included multiple U.S. presidents, the Rockefellers, Henry Ford, Thomas Edison. This was the Mayo Clinic of its era. His health philosophy was genuinely ahead of its time in several ways. He understood gut health and intestinal bacteria decades before mainstream medicine took it seriously. Anti-tobacco, anti-alcohol, whole foods, vegetarian. A lot of it holds up. Now, the cornflakes. They were intentionally bland. No sugar. Designed to calm the body and reduce what Kellogg believed were excessive physical appetites, specifically sexual appetite. He was a Seventh-day Adventist who believed that meat and stimulating foods inflamed carnal desire. Bland grain food would quiet the body and, in his view, elevate the spirit. The health intent was real. The theory connecting cereal to moral purity was eccentric. But this was not a man trying to sell product. This was a man trying to save souls through digestion. In 1917, a dietitian named Lena Cooper published a piece in Kellogg's own magazine, Good Health, that included the line, "In many ways, breakfast is the most important meal of the day." That's the birthday, not ancient wisdom, not medical consensus. A sentence in a magazine that Kellogg controlled.
So how does it go from one sentence in a health magazine to something every school and every pediatrician in America repeats as settled fact?
That's where the brother comes in. W.K. Kellogg, the younger brother, saw the commercial potential in what John Harvey had built. He wanted to add sugar to the cornflakes. John Harvey refused. Sugar defeated the entire health purpose. That was the line he wouldn't cross. They split. WK founded what became the Kellogg Company in 1906, added the sugar, scaled the manufacturing, built a global empire. John Harvey's intentionally bland morality food became the sweetened breakfast cereal industry. The brothers reportedly never reconciled. One of John Harvey's patients, a man named C.W. Post, walked out of Battle Creek, opened his own sanitarium, and founded Post Holdings. Grape Nuts, Post Toasties. The entire American breakfast cereal industry traces back to one building in Michigan and the patients who passed through it. Then in 1944, General Foods, the Grape Nuts Company, launched a radio campaign. Eat a good breakfast, do a better job. Ads announced that nutrition experts say breakfast is the most important meal of the day. The experts were funded by cereal companies. The studies didn't ask whether breakfast was beneficial, just whether cereal eating correlated with better performance. Nobody asked compared to what. The phrase escapes into school curricula, government nutrition guidelines, pediatric advice, parenting culture, completely detached from its origin, a morality campaign, a family feud, and a radio ad. 3 meals a day wasn't a biological discovery either. It was the Industrial Revolution's factory clock formalized into culture. Workers needed to eat before a 5 in the morning start. Breakfast became structural, not nutritional. And then the marketing machine told everyone it was essential. One honest note on John Harvey before we move on. He left his entire estate to the Race Betterment Foundation, an organization he founded that promoted eugenics. Early Kellogg Company profits flowed there too. The wellness utopia framing of Battle Creek has a shadow. It belongs in the full picture. But the cornflakes themselves, genuine attempt at health food. The corrupted version came from his brother's business decision, not his intention.
So that's where the cultural mandate comes from. What happens when you actually test it scientifically?
The evidence doesn't support it. A 2019 review in the British Medical Journal found no good evidence that eating breakfast promotes weight loss, and no evidence that skipping it causes weight gain. The researchers concluded that breakfast is not the most important time of day to eat, even though that belief is deeply embedded in culture worldwide. Time-restricted eating research consistently shows metabolic benefits from compressing the eating window, which for most people means skipping breakfast. Improved insulin sensitivity, better fat oxidation, lower fasting insulin. The mechanisms align with everything we know about how insulin drives fat storage. The hunger piece matters too. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, adapts to habitual eating patterns. Skip breakfast consistently and hunger signals shift rather than intensify. The assumption that skipping breakfast causes overeating later is not well supported in people who have repaired their metabolic signaling. The body is flexible. It was designed to be flexible. It ran in a fasted state for most of human history and it did fine.
And that's where the personal piece comes in. Because for me, OMAD, 1 meal a day, and fasting was a large part of how I got metabolic health back. And when you actually track it, blood sugar, ketones, energy, how you feel, it starts to look a lot like what humans were doing for most of history, just with modern tools confirming it's working.
And that's the part that doesn't show up in the cereal commercials. You're not doing something radical. You're doing something ancient. With a keto scan and a CGM instead of just listening to your body because there was nothing else available. The tools are new. The pattern is as old as the species. What's interesting about tracking it the way you do is that it removes the argument from the realm of belief. You're not trusting the philosophy, you're watching the numbers. Fasting insulin drops, ketones come up, energy stabilizes. The hunger that was supposed to be unbearable just isn't, because ghrelin adapted exactly the way the research says it does. The metabolic recovery piece is also worth naming directly. This wasn't a lifestyle preference for you. It was a clinical situation. Advanced metabolic dysfunction, facing insulin, refusing it, finding a different path. OMAD wasn't a biohack. It was part of the intervention that worked when the standard advice hadn't. And that's actually the sharpest reframe of the breakfast mythology. The standard advice, Eat breakfast, keep your metabolism running, don't skip meals. That advice wasn't neutral. For people with metabolic disease, it was actively pointing in the wrong direction. More eating windows, more insulin spikes, more of the mechanism that was already broken. The cultural mandate didn't just fail to help. For a specific and very large population, it pointed toward more damage.
So, stepping back, this isn't really about whether breakfast is good or bad.
It's about understanding where the idea came from. The Romans didn't build their lives around breakfasts, and they named the grain that would eventually be marketed back to us as a morning necessity. Hippocrates prescribed OMAD. The medieval church called early eating a sin. Every major religion built fasting into its practice. Then in the 20th century, a bland health food invented to suppress sexual appetite got sugar added against the inventor's wishes. A radio campaign attached nutrition experts to the claim, and the whole thing got handed to every school and pediatrician in America as settled biological fact. The cultural mandate has no scientific foundation, and it has a very specific commercial origin. You're allowed to know that. The better question was never, is breakfast the most important meal of the day? It's, what eating pattern actually works for your metabolism? Because for a lot of people, for most of human history, that answer doesn't start in the morning.
Well, Claude, this would have been the perfect ending. I think we did a great job of debunking that myth. But because we laid out a pretty good argument for restricted eating windows and fasting and knowing the landmine field, I wandered through to get back to my metabolic health. I can't in good conscience end this without saying, if you are under medical care, talk to your care provider before making changes to your diet.
That's the right instinct. And it's worth saying clearly, rather than just tagging it on as a disclaimer. If you're managing diabetes, taking medications that interact with food timing, particularly insulin, metformin, or anything that affects blood glucose, changing your eating window isn't just a lifestyle decision. It can affect your dosing requirements, sometimes quickly. That's a conversation that needs to happen with someone who knows your numbers. The same applies to anyone with a history of disordered eating, anyone who is pregnant, and anyone on blood pressure medications that are sensitive to hydration and electrolyte shifts, which fasting can affect. The evidence we walked through today is real. The history is real. But real evidence applied to the wrong individual situation without medical oversight can still cause harm. Roger's path worked. The tracking confirmed it was working. He had visibility into what his body was doing at every step. That's not the same as someone hearing this episode and deciding to skip breakfast tomorrow while still on the same medication doses they were prescribed for a different metabolic baseline. Know your situation. Talk to your provider. And if your provider isn't familiar with time-restricted eating research, which is genuinely possible, that's a conversation worth having too. Bring the BMJ review. Ask the question. You're entitled to a real answer. The goal of this show has always been informed decisions, not prescribed ones. That's a wrap on this one.